This week, we've got a couple of interviews, the first of which is Ferruh Mavituna from Netsparker. We'll be talking about the contrasting and comparing penetration testing at web applications versus automated dynamic scanning, which should be fun, and we'll probably delve into other topics as well. Then, Joe McManus from Automox will be joining us. Joe has an awesome background in security. He's held a lot of interesting positions. And is now the CISO for Automox that provides patching on a multi-platform environment, which we use here in the studio. So it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about some projects that he's done in addition to trying to get all those patches applied in your enterprise. In the enterprise news today, Dome 9, Centrify, SolarWinds, Mimecast, Alien Vault, and Secure Auth plus Core Security are in the news this week, all with announcements that we will cover at the end of the show. So stay tuned for all that and more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
I'm a tiger. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know how this is going to go because Paul's not here this week, but we're just going to give it a shot.
Even if you've got experience in security, you can benefit from going to somewhere and learning about that bug again. Wearing my tactical turtleneck just for Mr. John Strand, who is on the lines via Skype. John, welcome to the program.
I'm wearing the tactical fleece as well, Paul. This is excellent. A fully, completely, and utterly tactical show.
Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs in-command SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. In-command SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/security weekly and request to see in-command SOAR live in action. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is, of course, episode 98 for Wednesday, July 11th, 2018. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. A couple of announcements to get us started. Well, first of all, John Strand is not here this week. He's actually doing some teaching. So jumping into the announcements, we just released our 2018 listener survey for you to fill out. You can go to securityweekly.com/survey. Help us to continue to provide you with quality content in addition to learning a little bit about our audience so that we can provide the best service possible to all of our partners. So please do that, securityweekly.com/survey. The webcast that's coming up is with Domain Tools on July 18th. Mike Thompson will be joining John Strand and myself talking about OODA loops and fingerprinting threat actors, not to be missed. securityweekly.com/domain tools. It's going to be awesome. And if you're attending Black Hat or DEF CON, or Black Hat and DEF CON, we'll be in the pool area in both hotels. We have now confirmed that we'll be doing some special stuff. We've got bags to give away. suntan lotion, which you're going to need at the pool. So like bring your bathing suits and stuff. Come visit us at the pool. We've also, that's the place where you'll come if you saw our interview with Gary Berman, who created the Cyber Hero Adventures comic book as a security awareness and training kind of publication in a comic book, which is really cool. You can pick up your free copy of that comic book at either of our pool cabanas and our presence in the vendor area at DEF CON. So you can do that at Black Hat, the pool area, DEF CON at the pool area, or in the vendor area. So that is, and Gary will be there for, we don't know exactly when, not the entire time, as you know, Gary will be wandering about, but he'll be there signing some copies of the comic. It's really awesome. Check out the Paul Security Weekly segment that we did on that comic, because I think it's really cool and a great way to get your friends and family and maybe some of your coworkers kind of up to speed on some of the latest cybersecurity threats. Our interview today, we'd like to welcome back Ferruh Mavituna from Netsparker. Ferruh, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks for having me again.
Yes, always nice to chat application security, especially here on this show. And today we're going to kind of compare and contrast, I think talk about some of the pluses and minuses in today's landscape for application security. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of each approach, right? Hiring a human being to test your application versus doing automated testing. I think a lot of people are doing both. How do you balance these two, Ferruh?
Yeah, I think your point is right. Pretty much everyone is doing both, and they should be. This is not one, as we always say, almost with every security solution, and whenever this has been discussed, there's no silver bullets. And we always say security is a process. It's not something you can slap on. It's not something you can say, hey, now everything is done, let's add security. It doesn't work like that. So security needs to be part of the process. And in here, the question I will kind of try to touch is like an answer, hopefully, that what does it mean to, what are the advantages and disadvantages, and where in that process you need people and where in that process you need automation, or can you kind of switch and which one you can choose. And, as we kind of briefly touched prior to show with you, landscape of web development has been changed like radically almost over the years. It's not just web, overall development has been changed. And what happened is we used to talk about more waterfall, old school model. You say, I'm going to do my next release in 12 months. Let's do this, let's do that, let's do this. And then I will go through QA. It will take another 2 months. Then before launch, 2 months prior to launch, I will hire a pen testing team. I will involve my security team. They will do the tests, and they will come back to us. We will retest.
Now, Ferruh, now 2 months used to be pretty generous, right? Typically, it's like, hey, we're releasing next week. Can you do a security review on that? I think it's gotten better, but I think historically, right, that's how it goes down.
That's it. And the problem is that always what I've seen in real world, and when I was a pen tester, it was the same thing. We go ahead, we give them the report, and they're like, we were going to release tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, like, that's a big deal. But today, when we look at pretty much every modern web development shop, product, company, enterprise, they're on some sort of agile development model. Mm-hmm. And deploying to live multiple times a day is almost the norm now. Like, everyone does that. So it changed a lot. You cannot say, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to pass it to QA, I'm going to pass it to blah, blah. It doesn't work like that. So we automate some of this process to make sensible. In QA, we got heavy reliance on regression testing, in Web Selenium testing, in backend and other pieces, a lot of unit testing. Even JavaScript is very, unit tested today, which makes sense. You got the regression and everything. But the security is one of those components. Okay, what do we do with web security now? And from this, we talk about automation in web security, and this is a huge aspect of it. If we were to, let's say, there are two aspects, but let's talk about an enterprise where they got in-house security people who can do these tests. It can be called product security or security team, internal red team, pen testing, doesn't matter. Every company calls a different name. But majority of big companies do have some sort of internal testing capability. So you are the developer, you develop something, and you're gonna push it to live, and you say, oh, let me call security. But if you do that, then you're not gonna be able to push it live, and it's gonna take ages to go on that. And this is simply unacceptable by so many companies today. So if you look at what Netflix, Facebook, or similar companies do practice today, they simply say, look, that kind of security model simply unacceptable. We will have the secure code training, we will have some basis coverage, we will have some automation, but there is nothing that will stop us to push multiple times a day to live environments. The only reason should be some automated test is blocking the push because you've broken a known problem, whether it's a security or QA issue, or an automatic new vulnerability, or again QA issue has been discovered.
Yeah, so, and I really, before you mentioned, you touched on agile development, and what I really like is if you integrate a dynamic automated scanner in that process, that ties very nicely into your agile development. Because if a tool reports some kind of security condition, if I'm in an agile model, I'll write the test case for that condition, and then I'll go back and fix it. And to speak to your awareness part, hopefully change my procedures and policies to make sure that that bug doesn't happen again, and doing some kind of review with the team to make sure you're not reintroducing those same bugs. And so security is really set up very nicely in that scenario.
That's correct. I mean, there are so many reasons to detect a vulnerability as early as possible in your release pipeline. We have all these release pipeline, right? So you got the initial place where you develop the code, then you commit, then it goes to continuous integration, automated testing, staging, deployment, or directly into live, whatever. But in all of these steps, the earlier you get in this pipeline, it's cheaper to address the vulnerability. It's better because, as you mentioned, developers will learn their mistakes immediately, not 1 month later. Then they introduced vulnerability. So there are just so many aspects of it just makes sense. And we know from very detailed research on the subject, even I think like 40 years ago, we knew earlier you detect on the development cycle is cheaper to address and cheaper to fix.
And I think that was some of the major issues with waterfall development. If you look at a 12-month release cycle, if I start coding a feature like 3 months in, and it doesn't get security testing until month 11, there are a lot of pieces of code that could be intertwined in dependencies on that one feature that has a bug. Now it's going to take me 10 times as long to like unravel that mess and fix that vulnerability, let alone the factor of I haven't looked at that piece of code maybe in a couple of months or more, and now it's completely foreign to me. So I completely agree for all those reasons. You got to get in early as the process as possible to fix it.
That's very right. And as you said, like one of the biggest things you will see that I've already forgotten about that code. And the other thing is you do, a developer makes a mistake, a design mistake, or use, for example, text input, very obvious one. Text input, but doesn't filter correctly, doesn't, use it correctly, or whatever the problem is. And then they keep just using the same thing for like months and months. And I remember again from the pen testing, I go there, I find, let's say, one cross-site scripting, and then there like another one. And I stop looking for them, and I write a report like, you know what? In every single input, you got cross-site scripting.
Yeah,
go ahead
exactly.
And fix it.
Yeah, just go fix all that. Yeah. Now, what's interesting?
You got it wrong.
Yeah. And so what I started thinking about as you were talking, Ferruh, is, that concept of black box testing. And I think we've come a long way in that respect. And I think that if we look at our automated dynamic scanners, even those scanners aren't operating in sheer black box mode, right? You're taking inputs from other areas, from other various sources to gain as much information about the application before you go scan it. Are you continuing kind of down that path today, especially as you integrate into Agile and DevOps environments?
Yeah, that's correct. So as we said, we want to detect as early as possible. And if we go even the beginning of inception of the code itself, where the developer is writing in their bugs, that's where you want some sort of static integration. Maybe integration in the ID is quite popular today.
Hmm.
So after you put that semi-comma or whatever at the end of your line or press enter, your ID says, hey, you know what? This seems like a SQL injection. And that's great because like that's instant. So you got multiple cycles in there, and the next cycle is in there. You commit the source code, and again you run the static, which is historically is the most common, arguably most common security feature on the CI pipeline. But the challenge is there are advantages of static and there are advantages of dynamic. So in practice, if you look at research, and I think I might be wrong. This should be Google, a research published by Google internal team. It might be one of the other, one of the big techs. And there was this
Sorry,
research, and they say,
someone just walked in on set because the door was unlocked. Sorry, someone just saying random person saying hi.
right. So in that research, they discovered if they just dump a report to developers, like again, think about SDLC integration, your own continuous integration server, and every piece of code is checked by static and generated 20 issues. If you just pass those issues blindly to developers, developers actually stop using them.
Yeah.
And they discovered like this is actually not working because relatively soon the noise signal ratio started to not work well and everything is just being ignored. So that's the advantage of static. It's quick, you can do it even on your bugs. Disadvantage is you got this kind of high false positive rate or non-actionable items or almost irrelevant items, too many. And then we move forward, which is, the dynamic comes in, which recently are becoming popular on the CI pipeline as well. So right after you deploy the application, you do dynamic testing. The advantage of dynamic testing, you can actually get extremely accurate results. Especially on the Netsparker side, we got a special technology that we safely exploit the vulnerability and to prove that the vulnerability is completely real. So this solves that particular problem. And when we integrate in CI pipeline, we tend to not send any vulnerabilities to developers unless it's confirmed. So unless it's 100% true vulnerability. Because if you don't do that, they will stop trusting you. They will stop addressing issues because they will start assuming, look, you are hindering my job now. I just want to develop code and push it. You are just blocking me for stupid reasons that not even real.
Ferruh, have you seen teams that are kind of putting information in their dynamic scanner to help it be not just more accurate but more comprehensive? In other words, as a developer, I may know what the API looks like in all of the calls that exist in my API, and I may know my directory structure and all of the transactions that need to happen within the application. Can I feed that into my dynamic scanner so it doesn't have to work as hard and guess like what the application looks like?
You definitely can. So there are like plenty of options on that. And when it comes to web service example that you have given, API example, that's actually one of the examples developers are very good at feeding into the tool because they generally have a structured model of the API, something like a wisdom file,
Yeah.
or Swagger file, which they can just import, and that's fantastic. But when it comes to, let's say, something like a directory structure, especially with today's modern development environments, it's almost arbitrary. Like,
Yeah.
the individual developers is almost are disconnected from the those details, if that makes sense. And with the prevalence of URL rewrite and similar technologies, is you got this model of I develop code and it just generates URL.
Yeah. Sure.
And it can actually get time consuming to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So majority of the time what we see, developers do rely on full automation upfront, unless it's something like a web service. And then after they scan, when the scan finished, they review the results. And for example, in Netsparker, we have a special report that shows you the coverage. And if you look at it, and as a developer, you generally got a good sense of what your website looks like. And you say, hey, it seems like it completely missed this section. And then you might remember, oh, right, that was our administration section or editor section, which is not linked from anywhere.
Right.
And the directory name is not easily guessable. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to adjust the policy, import this in, and then start an if scan like that. Or if you got a very complex application with various things similar to this, or a mobile application even, you can just proxify the whole traffic and, teach that to your scanner.
Right, right. Yeah, I think, and this might be a somewhat controversial opinion, but I'm kind of coming down to like your dynamic scanner and your human penetration tester really shouldn't be doing black box testing. Like each of those processes should have some information. Now, I think in the case of a pen tester, I think as an organization, if I produce an application, I want to give that tester as much information about my application as possible to give them all the information up front so they don't have to spend their cycles in the discovery phase or what have you, and give them a good foundation to do their testing. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. It's a mixed bag, right? I personally coming from a black box pen tester, let's say culture, to us, even sometimes when I have the source code, the first thing I look at black box, then I move to the source code when it's relevant. And there's actually some logic to that. To give you an idea, in a modern web application, if you're looking at the source code, especially when you don't have the building environment, this is where it gets tricky. If you cannot compile and put a breakpoint, but if you are trying to look at the source code to find a security vulnerability, in an application that you haven't designed, it's extremely hard. It takes a lot of mental effort to compile that code in your mind, and then match that with what you are seeing in black box environment. So that's the challenge of it. Having said that, I agree with you. If you have, if I have this directory, like there is no point me brute forcing that directory. Just give me the directory, so just start testing on it. Which is, I believe, a separate issue. But in practical test, the interesting bit about black box, and I remember, and it still happens, it's about which risk you are evaluating today. I don't like the idea, as I say, brute forcing for it. But I get sometimes why you might want to scope one of your tests like that, because that actually shows you a very real risk.
Yes.
When you provide extra information to the tester, sometimes you are over the line and you provide something that they wouldn't actually know at all. And that changes the real risk. But at the end of the day, we are always trying to find more vulnerabilities. And there is no point of security through obscurity or, anything like that. So by all means, give all the data you have to your dynamic scanner, or your pen tester. And that's you will get best results like that. I completely agree with that.
Where I'm kind of coming down to in terms of application security is if I've got a public facing application, right? Let's set aside internal applications, right? But if I've got an application that's going to go on the internet and be exposed to the entire world, right? I'm going to do that dynamic testing we talked about. I'm going to have a penetration testing team at some kind of regular interval, whether it's internal or external, do the evaluation of that with as many resources as I'm, can give them to aid in their testing. I think your black box testing, again, if it's an externally internet-facing application, your external testing today is your crowdsourced pen test or it's your bug bounty. And I'm going to have that program as well, provided the risk is worth that investment. There are many different levels of crowdsourced and bug bounty programs that are out there today. But I think that's an effective strategy. Certainly not for everyone, right? As you started talking about risk, it depends on what's at stake for that application.
There is the bug bounty aspect of it is particularly interesting. There is the base level of security. So one of the funny things when I look at bug bounty, this happens to various companies when they first open their bug bounty, they hit by this enormous amount of vulnerabilities very quick, right? And the funny thing, every time I see this, and even funnier, when I see this, and some of the reports actually coming right out of Netsparker, that's the funny thing. Like so many of those vulnerabilities would have been identified by Netsparker, or even actually identified by the reporter by using a Netsparker or a similar dynamic tool. That's where the company loses a lot of time dealing with the reports and so many other issues. Very bad. They could have actually done that internally in a day. However, now they're ending up like all this noise and everything from external bug bounty testers. The way I feel about bug bounty and all the testing process, you definitely want to do your job on your end.
Yeah.
And when you got out, then what bug bounty should be bringing to you is very obscure, super interesting, completely, complex human interaction required kind of things, or very interesting logical vulnerabilities. But if you are finding, oh, I'm exposing my Apache status server page, or I'm disclosing version, or using an older version of WordPress or jQuery, you're just wasting your money and time. It's just pointless for everyone involved in the process.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in some organizations will use a bug bounty as kind of a general, like, we haven't really done much, testing in our app. Let's do a bug bounty. And I think economically that could be bad for them, right? Because like you said, they're going to find every time a bug bounty hunter finds a bug, there's typically some kind of payment, right? Now there are some where payment isn't involved in different style programs, but you can pay a lot of money for, like you said, stuff that you should really be finding on your own and doing your own level of analysis. And I think that the strategies that we've talked about already are, in today's world, especially if you're agile and DevOps, table stakes. You're set up to do these things as part of your process.
Oh yeah, but also I don't think the actual monetary value of the bug bounty, so the bounty itself, matters. Like the bounties are extremely cheap. If you look at them, they're like possibly cheaper labor than any pen testing service you can hire.
Sure.
Right? But the bigger cost is actually on the company side. Someone needs to get all those reports, look into them, decide whether they are true positives or false positives. Then, when they don't understand, they need to communicate further. And in bug bounty, like some of these communications is public and sometimes even ridiculed in Twitter or social media. You can see how that communication can end up like 25 emails back and forth. And the whole fixing process is like 3 weeks. Very bad. Internally, you would have done it in a day.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest cost, almost a hidden cost, that you just spent $100,000 a year engineer time on that stuff.
Right. No, I agree because, as I have been involved with the software development process, the bugs are not only easier to find early on, but they're easier to deal with when all parties know about the application, its usage, the code base, they've read the documentation, they've been involved in the meetings and the environment. Then I think everyone can kind of help with the risk evaluation, with looking at that bug and saying if it's real or not and what it impacts, if all parties involved are part of the internal team. And I think what you're talking about, Ferruh, is someone way on the outside is like, that's a bug. There's work in that process to say, well, where do we fix that? How do we fix that? What's the impact? Is it real? How real is it to be exploited, outside of a bug bounty program? What can they do with it? That kind of thing.
Yes, and on top of that, I feel like as a security community, we have gone soft. The part that we have gone soft, back in the day, you publish an application, and if you got a serious vulnerability in it, you are worried you're gonna actually get hacked. Your data is gonna get stolen, and so many other things. Nowadays, we almost feel like, everyone got vulnerabilities. So what if we got hacked? Or so what? Not so what if we got hacked, but we are like, someone will pick up some white hat hacker and report it to us. And I find it quite interesting. It happens when it happens when there is no monetary gain for the attacker. So if I'm an actual attacker, some dodgy, shady part of the world or part of the place, and I'm going around, okay, how can I make money? And then I'm not going to report any vulnerability because that's not going to make money. But if the vulnerability is simply useless, I'm going to either, just do something else or report it. But think about this. Let's say Bitcoin or any digital coin environment and how many hacks that we have been hearing. The only reason that we have been hearing all of this, because when you hack a kind of a Bitcoin, like, currency exchange market or whatever, you can actually make real money very easily. So if your business got this kind of risk, are you willing to, roll the dice on that? That's the
Right.
real question. And I feel like too many companies nowadays feel like they're okay with it. And, I feel like as a community, not just security, but overall users of these, customers of these companies, we became almost too, forgiving to these companies.
Yeah. Well, and I also think, putting vulnerabilities in context and understanding the impact is extremely difficult, regardless of how you discover the bug. And I had this kind of like stupid moment where I was reading the WordPress vulnerabilities that came out recently, and there were 2 file deletion bugs essentially that let an outside attacker basically delete files. And I'm like, well, if you don't have backups, that's kind of bad. And then I'm like, so the impact is not that great. And then I'm like, oh wait, well, I started reading more, and I'm like, oh yeah, if you delete that WP config file, it flips back into the wizard that lets you reconfigure the site and gives the attacker full control of the site. So I think putting things in context is really important as well.
That's a very good point. And about bug bounties, I've heard so many stories internally and also externally publicly that someone reported a vulnerability, and internal team realized that actually that can lead to something much bigger. And
Right.
sometimes they actually awarded the reporter based on that much bigger impact rather than what they actually realized.
Yeah.
Or I heard from the internal teams the same thing happened, and they addressed what's been reported, but also they addressed what might have happened with that chain of issues.
Mm. So in summary, Ferruh, I think we need all of this in your application. We need all the style of testing. I mean, is this like for everyone, or how do you, when you're building an application, kind of plan out, okay, I need some kind of static testing, I need some dynamic testing, I need a penetration tester, and maybe I need a bug bounty program. Like, how do you guide people in mapping out which components they need and when?
Yeah, I mean, I can actually talk about that for 30 minutes or 60
Right.
minutes, but give you the very short summary on that. When we work with a lot of enterprises with so many websites, not 2, 5, 10, but I'm talking about 1,000 to a couple of thousand websites. And, I explain them how they need to build and set up their application security process. And the process relies on some key components, right? Automation is part of it. Pen testing and all sorts of manual testing is part of it. But if you lay out in the pipeline, as we discussed, so the early on, you want to put automation. Static is good, but what you want to be very strict with it. So only stuff that definitely going to produce real results rather than just noise. So that requires a lot of configuration and getting it right. After that, you want to put dynamic. And in the dynamic, you want something like Netsparker. When you get results, they are real. And what you want to do on top of this, you want to build a workflow. That's something we do in Netsparker. It's not just I found a vulnerability, but this vulnerability is automatically created a ticket for the responsible developer. And then if the developer hasn't fixed it, it told you. And if the developer fixed it, but the fix wasn't correct, it retested it. And if it wasn't working, it went back to the developer. So you need this workflow. Otherwise, you got a lot of time spent on just following up these vulnerabilities. And after this stage, you want on design and ideally on some checkpoints on the development and deployment with actual pen testing. But once the application initially developed and you got into the maintenance mode and keep developing new features, again, you want pen testers now and then joined. New features need to be, again, people need to test it. And even in dynamic testing, you got the option, for example, with Netsparker again, you can say, hey, you know what? I want more manual testing. I got this very spatial interaction, as you mentioned earlier. I want to teach Netsparker how to navigate this. I want to teach Netsparker what are the right values in here to get the result. And I want Netsparker to do the automation in that, because I don't want to do manually 100, send 100 different payloads, even if I know what I need to be sending. And this is roughly, the key points. And obviously, a mature application security process is a much longer discussion with so many other components, from software composition analysis, being on top of your third-party applications. How do you accept a third-party provider's web application on your environment? How do you commission? How do you decommission? So they're all this. But the core is you want to automate in your development stage, and you want to automate in your live environment, and you want to automate not only your scanning, but also you want to automate your workflow. You need to distribute your tickets to assign responsible parties. What you don't want to do, 1,000 ticket goes back to the original security team, which is generally just 5 people, not more. Then who is just spending months, like which one of the are real, if you don't have this, something like proof-based scanning. And then how do you prioritize? And okay, let's now start assigning this to developers. Then they do follow up. Oh, did these developers actually do their job? Have they been fixed? And even when the developers say, I fixed this, when you actually go ahead and check, you realize they didn't deploy it. And you go back to developers, hey, guys, you told us you fixed this. And they're like, oh, yeah, but we forgot to deploy. Mm-hmm. And like all those efforts, because you haven't deployed, is gone. And that's another thing. For example, it's nice to find a vulnerability is static. But if you don't have the workflow that the vulnerability is fixed and actually deployed and prove that the deploy is correct, then you are missing a lot of, that's a huge gap in your environment. And this stuff matters when you have 500 websites. If you have 2 websites, I'm sure you'll be fine. You will remember top of your head. When you show up at work, you will say, I've got these vulnerabilities that needs to be fixed. But it doesn't scale.
Mm. Well, Ferruh, thank you very much for appearing on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Awesome conversation. I enjoyed it. I'm sure our listeners will as well. Again, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Thank you.
And with that, we will take a short break and come back with our next interview with Joe. I was saying his last McManus, Joe McManus from Automox will be joining us next. Stay tuned.